So, if you got a 4.5 liter Mercruiser engine, do you know how much water it holds? With the thermostat? Without the thermostat? Do you know how much water it holds when the engine's cold? And how much it takes to fill it up once it's warmed up? Have you ever had trouble doing the winterizing where you didn't think you got the block full, and when you drained it you didn't get very much back? I'm going to get into the answers to these and some other questions. I'm in the process of completing, I'll say, de-winterizing the boat and getting ready to put it in the lake for spring. And as I did so, I'm making measurements of the results from last fall's winterizing process, and I wasn't happy. So I'm digging in a little bit to get some better answers. And if you stay with me, I'll dig in and show you. One of the things that I've watched is the way that the shop manual has you winterize this engine. I've had a couple of things. One is that I don't get as much coolant out of the block as I would expect. And then secondly, the coolant that I get out seems to be diluted. So just to follow up on a couple of things. So this is the bottle. I was very careful to catch all the coolant. This is my bottle of what I caught. Now on a good year I get about 1 3/4 gallons. This year I got a little less than a gallon, and actually last fall I drained off about 8 ounces, about a cupful, so I could do a concentration check when I put the boat away. Now, I keep this in a garage that stays above freezing, so the exact concentration probably isn't critical. But if you're going to store it outside and so forth, you really want to make sure it doesn't freeze up. And so I'm continuing to learn. This was my third year of winterizing. So first of all, I didn't get as much as I thought. So the second thing is, I'm going to get a sample out of the bottle here. Suck it up in here, and then put a couple drops on the measuring instrument here, refractometer to be precise. Tap it, push it down, and when I go take a hard look at that one, it gives me, for propylene glycol, it says that I have a concentration of 41%. I'm at minus 5 degrees. 5 degrees is not anywhere close to where I had it last fall, which suggests to me that there's water still trapped in the lines on the block that works its way down over the course of the storage and dilutes whatever's in the block. The second challenge is, I am very suspicious, I don't have it proven, but there is a thermostat in the block, and I think what happens is that when you the procedure is to use the single point drain the entire block, let it sit for 10 minutes or so after it's idled and been warmed up, but it sits for 10 minutes or so and drains. And then you put the 4-gallon or 4 or 5 gallon bucket of antifreeze on the back, fire the engine up, and it sucks that into the engine. But until the engine gets warm, the thermostat doesn't open and you don't get good circulation in the block. And so my suspicion is that the thermostat's not opening and the block isn't getting full. You do get a lot of flow out the exhaust because the system's prioritized in order to keep the exhaust system from overheating. And so, you send water out there, and I can collect that in the exhaust, and the measurements are all good, indicating that the exhaust manifolds and so forth are getting filled, and there's no dilution. But somewhere, it's causing things to deteriorate as the year goes through. So I'm going to show you one more thing. If you come in, and you come in down to here, when you're prepping this engine, you can see there's a blue plug here. And when you're draining, the single point drain and so forth, you're instructed to pull that plug out. And it's supposed to be on the back side of the thermostat. And being on the back side of the thermostat, it will put air in on the back side and ensure that everything drains out through the single point drain. What I think I need to do, and it's not a normal pipe thread, as I recall, it's an odd thread from the standpoint of you won't go to the hardware store and pick a standard fitting off that'll fit in that hole. So I need to figure out how to connect a hose to that properly. There's a school of thought that says that once you're done prepping this and you get antifreeze through all the systems, you should just open the single point drain and drain the system completely. And then, if the antifreeze dilutes like it did, you have less risk, if your freeze point is off, you have less risk of cracking the block. The troublesome thing would be is that you've gone through the whole winterizing process, and yet there's still water somewhere, and it's enough to move the freeze point on your antifreeze by, well, a considerable amount. I'll have to go back and look at my records from last fall, but I think I had it set so that it was good for -20 Fahrenheit, and now it's good for -5, so that's a pretty good shift, and it indicates there was a fair amount of water somewhere in the system. I'd like to sort that out, because there are times where I end up having to set the park a boat outside, and it gets pretty darn cold. The numbers I'm quoting are freeze points, and on propylene glycol, the actual burst point of a system is much lower. When you hit the freeze point, that's when things start to get slushy, and there's a considerable amount of, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I probably at -5 was probably not going to freeze the boat up, because the reality is that the burst point would have probably been, if it was -5, it was probably -25 or 30 burst. But I don't like things that are unpredictable, and you buy a specific concentration of a material and you want to put it in that block and make sure that you're getting the performance you expect. That the antifreeze in the block always seems to come out more diluted in spring than it was in fall, and so I'm still looking for ways to make that better. And I've been through, there are, on this V6, there are quick disconnects on the sides of the block, and I've gone in and disconnected those and run a wire through them to make sure that the water's really draining out and getting down to the single point drain. I know the block gets empty. Alright, well, I'm going to continue my experiments here. So the block was drained. Now I've hooked up the earmuffs and the garden hose. And what I'm going to do is fire this up and let it run for 2 or 3 minutes. Well, let's keep it short. What I kind of would like to do is simulate when I put antifreeze in the block through the bucket, and assuming that the thermostat doesn't open. So I'm going to light it up. I'll run it for 2 minutes, which ought to be less than what it takes to warm up the engine, and then I'm going to drain it and check it. So let's light her up here. Exactly 2 minutes. So now we'll turn off the water and disconnect the earmuffs and let it drain for a few minutes, and then I'm going to go drain and measure. Okay, this is after the 2 minutes run from a cold start with the garden hose on it. First thing I want to do is check the plug here. Okay, and I'm still in that same condition. There's some water at the bottom of the hole. Well, there's some reflection on the passage, but it's definitely not full. So we're going to I'm going to leave that plug out for now. And then I'm going to crack open the drain. Collect the water, and we're going to see how much we get here. Okay. So this is the water from draining the block. It's still draining. I'm going to just start filling the bottle so that I don't make a mess. Alright, 2 quarts. So we got a gallon. We got a gallon and a half almost exactly without having the thermostat open. And cold engine. It's had about 20 minutes of drain time. So now I've put the plugs back in. The only possible error, the nose is up on the boat a little bit so that the bilge will drain, because where the water drains are down in the bilge, if the nose is down too far, the water will just roll forward and it won't come out the back. So I measured, I'm about 3 degrees up angle or so, 2.5. So there could be just a little bit of water in the back of the water jackets on the block that didn't make it to the drains. That's probably my only source of error at this point. But I've only, I've raised the nose of the boat probably 4 inches from where, with the tongue jack, from where it normally would be. So, all right, now we're gonna go fire it up, try it again. I'm gonna light it up now for the second try, and this time I'm gonna let the engine warm up. I've got my gauges here, and I've got I also have a Vessel View app on my phone. So we're just going to let it sit here and run until the temp gauge comes up. Okay. Well, I'm about 3 minutes in, and you can see the temp gauge is up and moving. My Vessel View says I'm at 138, which is about where the stat cracks. So at 3 minutes or so, I'm on the thermostat, which, gee, when I'm pulling out of the antifreeze bottle, I ought to be able to get it up to that temp pretty quickly. So she went up to 138 and now dropped back to 136. It's at 138. It's bouncing back and forth a little bit here. But I'm just running at a stone cold idle with the well water on the garden hose. That's pretty cold water, so it's probably going to be very easy for it to stay on the thermostat. I'm going to give it another minute or two just to make sure that it's had. Give another minute or two to make sure it's had time to fully circulate in the block. I did go to the back of the boat, getting good flow out the exhaust ports and outlets. So we'll make this a full 5 minutes. But this engine does warm up onto the stat pretty fast. Always has. Okay, she's reading 142. And now about 7 minutes in, that ought to be warm enough. I'm going to shut it down and drain it, and we'll see what we get. Okay, now I'm back after, this is after full engine warm up. Yeah, it's fairly warm. Let's see if I get any, see if I get anything out of the blue plug this time. It's just always been a little mystery to me how this system is plumbed. Alright, opened up. And the answer is nothing comes out. It's the system has had 15 minutes after I disconnected the earmuffs for things to drain down naturally. So that crossover passage is open. I got a bucket underneath. We'll crack this open, a single point drain. I'm trying to be very careful how much water I let come out, because again, if you go down here, it's possible to get water to go up there into the bilge and not come back out. And so I'm just making sure that my stream of water hits and runs back, heads back to the back. So we'll let this drain and collect and see what we get. Okay, so the answer is that you get about 1.5 pints. You get less than a quart more that comes out when the thermostat has had a chance to circulate and get all the air out of the system. Interesting. That's not a whole lot of difference. Well, just for fun, one more thing. I did put a small pan underneath and level the engine up to see what else we could get out of it. And what did I get? Maybe another 6 or 8 ounces. Gets us back to the 3 quarts. So 1 3/4 gallons. That's the capacity of what you can drain out. Okay. I have one more experiment that I want to run on the winterizing. I've come to the thought, the issue is that 5 gallons of coolant in that bottle is not enough. In other words, this system puts enough coolant out to the exhaust. I'm making an assumption, it seems as though it must prioritize to the exhaust more than to the block. And so when you have 5 gallons of coolant in that bottle and it draws it down, I'm actually not getting the block full. You've seen me drain this a couple times, and I draw about 1.5 gallons to 1.75 gallons. 1.75 gallons seems to be the full amount of water that draining the block, that's what you'll get back. So I'll assume that's what it takes to fill it. So one more experiment is, I have a hose and a funnel and a couple gallons of water, and I'm going to go back here and I'm going to try to fill the block through the blue plug that's behind the thermostat and see how much it will take. My thought is that perhaps the challenge with My thought is that since the 5-gallon kit that I have does not let you fill, you can't add to the bucket while it's running. So that would leave you a couple of choices. Choice number one would be you could run it until it gets down, shut the engine off, go add some more coolant to the bottle and run it again. Or perhaps I can fill through the blue plug hole behind the thermostat and I'll call it pre-fill or prime the engine block with coolant before I start drawing from the 5-gallon bottle. Seems like an awful lot of coolant to have to mix up to fill a 2-gallon block, but perhaps that's what it takes. So in any case, I do have a hose and a funnel fixed up here, and we're just going to see how much coolant I can get in there and whether this is an option, I'll call it. That's where the blue plug goes. And what I have is I have one of these Jabsco pumps that I use for pumping oil out of the engine, and it comes with an extension hose that's a very small diameter hose with an adapter, and I've just put a funnel here, and then to try to help route the hose, I just ran it through one of these mounting points for the beauty cover and then down into the block. And I'm going to slowly pour water into it and see how much I get. See whether this has a chance. Won't fill very fast, but that's okay. It'll just take me a minute here. What I'll say is that on my older boat, which is a carbureted small block Mercruiser V8, Chevy V8, my technique for filling the engine is to get behind the thermostat in the intake manifold with a standpipe, and I pour coolant right in the block. The service manual for that one tells you to pull out the thermostat so that you can get behind it and fill the block. But I learned long ago that I could get the same effect by taking out a pipe plug and filling from there. And that's been a very effective method. So my thought is on this one, they give us this plug. If I can get behind the thermostat here, maybe I can fill the engine block. And then I would still probably, knowing how this engine works, I would still probably use my 5-gallon kit so that I got coolant into all the exhaust passageways and all of the hoses and plumbing. If everything makes logical sense, I ought to be able to fill this and put in 1 3/4 gallons, right? But we'll see. One challenge in doing this, those blue plugs are an odd size. And what I would really like to do is thread something into that hole, take the plug out and thread in a piece of tubing. But the Mercury folks chose a standard thread. They didn't choose a pipe thread, and it's a 1/2-13, and a 1/2-13 is a bolt thread, and so there is nowhere, and I've searched, there's nowhere in the world where you can find a piece of tubing with a 1/2-13 thread on it. The pipe threads would be like 1/2-14, but but not half 13. There's no straight pipe thread, tapered pipe thread, tubing thread. I've even tried to convert to metric. There's not even a metric thread. The only way to get a 1/2 inch adapter for that would be to make something from scratch. And the closest thing I've found, I found a European, British, I think it was, pipe plug for plugging a passageway that was half 13. But you'd still have to drill it out and modify it and glue to it, so don't know. Probably not worth it. But the reason that I like to be very careful is that out in front here is the serpentine belt. And the rubber in the serpentine belt is not, most of the rubber materials for the belts do not get along well with glycol-based coolants, and you'll end up deteriorating the rubber, and the belt will either slip or fail prematurely. And so you really don't want to spill coolant on the belt. And this fitting is down behind the belt in the back, so you need to have a good rig, something like this, where you can very carefully fill without contaminating the rubber. Alright, so here comes gallon number 2. Well, there we go. It's now running over. I lost just a little bit. What did I say lost? An ounce or two. Nothing major. It just spilled over the fitting. And so now it's full. All right. I'll tell you what. Here's my bottle. I've been emptying out a gallon and 3/4, a gallon and 3/4. I just put a gallon and 3/4 and filled the block up to the top of the blue plug. So I think that's a successful test. I drain a gallon and 3/4 and I put in a gallon and 3/4. So that pretty much says that's what the block and I guess the feed hoses at the bottom of the block, what they hold. So I think this is the wrong season to put the antifreeze bottle back on it. So what I think I'm going to do in fall, though, when I come back to winterize this the next time, is I'm going to follow the book. But when I get ready to put the antifreeze in, I will put a gallon and 3/4. I will fill that port until the block is full, and then run the bottle on the 5-gallon tank on the earmuffs, and run it so that everything gets circulated and fed out the exhaust. And to my earlier things with a little bit of dilution, when I'm only getting a gallon of solution back out, it only takes a few ounces to dilute that and cause the freeze point to change. And there must be a small amount trapped in hoses somewhere that, if you don't get the block full, isn't going to circulate through. So, strategy. Run the normal procedure by the book till you get to putting in the antifreeze. Then fill the block manually this way. Cap it up. Run the 5-gallon bucket on the back. And run it through the system, circulate it. And I collect I always collect what's coming out the exhaust. And I would just say the last thing is, in order to deal with the possibility that there is some dilution, just make sure you run a strong enough mix. And come fall, that's what I'll do. And I know it's going to be a while, but I'll report back how well that works out. But right now, that looks like a plan. That's all for now. Happy boating.